Hello everyone. So for our final video for week 8 was for us to conduct our project defense for our final papers. So throughout all the different discussion posts that we followed up through this whole entire course, some people were doing about consumerism, some people were doing about the corporations and its relation with the community. Mine specifically was for me to dive into two presidents and their economic policies. And one of the biggest questions that I've had, how it relates to the 1970s and 1980s. I wanted to have a research topic or my thesis question to specifically be was Ronald Reagan's economic policies more effective than Jimmy Carter's? There's a lot of history to the tale whenever it was from the 1970s and 1980s, especially with those two had two entirely different economic policies, especially how Keynesian was one of the main economic policies for Jimmy Carter, as well as some past presidents before him, while Ronald Reagan implemented one of his, in a way, very own economic policies that would later become Reaganomics today, that a lot of different, at least like parties discuss about, especially for the Republican Party. So what I try to do, especially with the significance from the 1970s with the counterculture versus the 1980s where Reagan tried to flip-flop, I wanted to entirely see how effective Ronald Reagan's economic policies were. A lot of the primary sources that I try to use were a lot of the speeches. I've had a lot when it comes to speeches from Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, like Jimmy Carter's crisis speech when it came talking about the whole entire inflation crisis, versus like maybe the inaugural address or even the State of the Union address that was given by Ronald Reagan that was talking about some of his achievements as well. I figured that would have been some of the important primary sources I've had, as well as there was one other source that I found from the Cato Institute, which is a statistic data research company. And they had two individuals that researched about Ronald Reagan's economic policies, and it did state from at least this Cato Institute, from these two individuals, it said for this one, and I did put it into my paper, on 8 of the 10 key economic variables examined, the American economy performed better during the Reagan years than during the pre and post Reagan years. So this kind of led to really help me to provide different statistics on top of it, especially from Ronald Reagan's State of the Union address that really influenced, or not really influenced, really suggested how his economic policies were doing good for the American people, like the low inflation, low interest rates, high consumer income for them to have more purchasing power. So he entirely wanted to talk about his achievements during that time. So that was one of the big significances, one of the big key primary sources that I've had. And there was some also key secondary sources that I didn't want to be entirely biased. I wanted to make sure to go in a way 50-50 and tell the story of each of the presidents within my final paper, talking about what Jimmy Carter faced, talking about what Ronald Reagan faced, especially for their tenure as president. However, statistics don't entirely lie for this scenario, so I made sure to implement like unemployment statistics. I made sure to talk about the inflation, especially with the 1970s and 80s during that time. I talked about the oil crisis that was going on. So there was a lot of different things that I made sure to at least talk about, because again, at the very end, what I answered was Ronald Reagan's economic policies were more effective than Jimmy Carter's economic policies. It didn't have one of the best starts for Ronald Reagan within his first like 2 years, but it was basically in year 3 and 4 of his administration that led to his Reaganomics to become more effective. Then later on, he started to implement another economic policy to help out with this. Um, I really am. I really enjoyed this course, and I really going to enjoy like what your defense is when it comes to your research topics. I hope that you find potentially my paper to be of maybe of some interest, and thank you for watching.